Okay, everyone. Welcome to PMP Live. My name is Leah, and I'm a bookseller at Politics and Prose, and I have the honor of being your host today. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in this virtual format, which allows us to continue to bring amazing authors and their really important books to readers like you. Especially during these trying times, it's really important to be able to have these discussions in diverse perspectives to continue the conversation on mental health awareness. So it's really special, and I'm so excited to welcome our great panelists today. So great to welcome IW, also known as Eileen Gregorio, Adib Khorram, and Ashley Woodfolk. In just a few moments, we're going to begin our chat. If you have a question for our guests, you can click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. And at the end, we'll have some time to answer those questions. You can vote on the ones you really want us to get to. Also, as always, please remember that this is a safe space. So please be respectful of one another in your questions and comments. And also, don't forget, you can click that shining green buy button at the bottom to get your own copies of Eileen's new book, This Is My Brain in Love, Adib's book, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, and Ashley's newest book, When You Were Everything, as well as any of the other amazing titles, like you should, from our website. And thank you guys all so much for supporting us in the bookstore. So now on to our main event. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guest. First up, it's my honor to introduce author, surgeon, advocate, and the leader of our discussion today, Eileen Gregorio. Her first novel, None of the Above, won a whole long line of honors, including the Lambda Literary Award finalist. And today we are celebrating her newest book, This Is My Brain in Love. In addition to her impact she's made through her amazing writing, she's also a board member of the Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth and is a founding member of We Need Diverse Books. So thank you, Eileen, for being here.
Thank you.
Yay. Next up, I'd like to welcome, it's my pleasure to introduce author, graphic designer, and as he said, tea enthusiast, Adib Khorram. Adib's debut novel, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, has earned him a long list of honors as well, including the William C. Morris Debut Award and the Asian Pacific American Award for Young Adult Literature. Greatly also anticipating his upcoming continuation of Darius's journey, and Darius the Great Deserves Better, which will be out later this year. So thank you so much, Adib, for being here too. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And last but not least, finally, we have the amazingly talented author, Ashley Woodfolk. Her debut novel, The Beauty That Remains, it broke my heart and put it back together again, beautifully portraying the varying ways how we grieve. And today she will be discussing her newest amazing book, When You Were Everything. Along with her brilliant contributions of writing, she's also works in publishing as well, and is a member of the Children's Book Council and Diversity Committee. So it is my honor to pass our virtual stage over to our panelists. So I will bow out so they can share their amazing insight and great books.
Thank you so much, Leah. I can't say how amazing it is to be here, even virtually, supporting our indie bookstores. Politics and Prose is just such a leader in the literary field, and it has given voice to so many conversations. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, great. I might need to pop out and then pop back in.
You win again, technology.
Frozen. But how about while I do that, Ashley and Adib can regale you guys all with a little elevator pitch of their books. And also, I know that all three of us are here, and to a certain extent, we're presenting books that we wish that we had as teenagers, addressing, I think, gaps within the field of children's literature. And so I wanted to start off with my first question being, can you guys just talk about what motivated you guys to write your books and how you feel that it fits into this new canon that we're creating?
Sure. Adib, you want to go first?
No, but you got me before I got you, so I guess I have to. So Darius the Great Is Not Okay is about a teenage Iranian American named Darius Kellner, who's nerdy, overweight, depressed, loves tea, and is obsessed with Star Trek. And he lives in Portland, Oregon. And when he travels to Iran to visit his family for the first time and his dying grandfather, he gets to connect with his heritage and a sense of self and make his first really good friend, his grandparents' neighbor named Sohrab, and kind of redefines his sense of self. And it's very nerdy and full of Star Trek references and tea and delicious Iranian food, because it turns out I'm always hungry when I'm writing, because I'm always hungry all the time anyways. And I definitely think of myself as a very selfish writer in a lot of ways. And I just kind of wrote the book that I wanted for teenage me. And I honestly never thought anyone would want it. And I also didn't care. I'd written quite a few other books that I thought were like marketable. Oh, you can't see my quotation fingers. Marketable. But didn't really get anywhere with them and didn't really love them that much anyway. And I realized I was writing about a bunch of straight white boys that were like rich, because that's what I thought all stories were about. And then I tried writing about a gay, but still a rich white boy. And then right around actually when I started writing Darius, I guess that was early 2015, and We Need Diverse Books got launched in 2014. And I was like, oh, maybe I should write about someone like me. And I did, and it was a lot of fun, and I'm still surprised anyone else wants to read it.
It's amazing. So of course other people want to read it.
Exactly.
So I guess I can go next. My new book is called When You Were Everything. It is a friendship breakup story. It is about two girls who were best friends and are no longer best friends, and it's told in a dual timeline, before and after, and or I guess then and now. Sorry, that changed during edits. So in the then, they're best friends, and you're sort of seeing how their friendship slowly fell apart, and in the now, they're not best friends anymore, and you're seeing how they're sort of interacting and what their new relationships are looking like, and how they're figuring out what their relationship should be like now. That said, I wanted to write this novel because I experienced a ton of friendship breakups when I was growing up. I feel like I had at least one major one at almost every stage of my childhood. I had one in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school, and one in college. And I've gotten very close to having them in adulthood as well. So yeah, it was just the topic that I felt like people didn't really talk about, but it was something that I think everybody has gone through or goes through at some point in their life. And I think in our culture, romantic relationships are sort of emphasized as better or as more important than platonic relationships. And that was never the case with me. A lot of times friendship breakups were a lot more devastating for me than the romantic ones. And so, yeah, I wanted to write this novel because it was something that I wish I had when I was 12 and 16 and 19. And so
25.
Right. And so I hope that it finds girls or people in general who need it and who are going through something similar.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you guys are all here and everyone in the crowd is here so that they can watch me fangirl over these two amazing authors who I've admired for so long. So I'm really excited to be here. So my book, This Is My Brain in Love, is a book that I definitely wrote for myself as a teenager, but in many ways I was really motivated to write for my kids. So as many of you guys know, I'm a doctor in real life, and it took a good long 5 years between my two books, and I always like to say that it just took me a while to find a book that I felt like I could neglect my children to write. And this is that book because I wrote it partially for them. And it's an Own Voices story that my publisher likes to pitch as a mostly happy book about mental illness. That's very greatly inspired and informed by my own experiences growing up in a first-generation immigrant family with pretty much undiagnosed anxiety and depression. And it's also been described as a foodie rom-com, which is like my new favorite subgenre. But more important than the rom-com aspect of it, I really wanted to just show it's written in dual narrative, and so there are 2 points of view. An Asian American female. I don't know how I got that inspiration, but also a Nigerian boy. And each of them have their own flavors of mental illness. And I really wanted to show how mental illness basically creates fake news in your brain. And so I needed 2 points of view so I could show how 2 people can see the same incident and have 2 entirely different reactions to them. And this book, I think for me, and I know that Adib is going to talk, and Ashley are going to talk about this as well. For me, I felt it was really important to write a happy book about mental illness, because I feel like for so long, the media narrative has really been dominated by stories about death by suicide, which is obviously the most dramatic final endpoint that anyone has to deal with when they're dealing with mental illness. But in making mental illness that all or nothing thing, where either you have it or you don't, and you try to die by suicide versus not having it, is that I feel like when you have that binary, people like me growing up, I often felt like I couldn't really be depressed because I wasn't depressed enough, because I didn't have suicidal ideation. And when kids are given a binary and they aren't given a spectrum, it's harder to find themselves in it, and it's harder to find themselves into treatment and therapy and even medications. And I wanted to address all those many things in this tiny little package. Mm-hmm. So I think that, like I said, we're going to open the questions up at the very end, but in the beginning, as icebreakers, I have these just little teasers that we can talk about amongst ourselves. And the first thing I want to mention was that obviously mental illness is incredibly pervasive. But one of the challenges of living is how everyone experiences it in their own way. And there's truly no single story. And I've sort of talked about what flavor of mental illness I wanted to put into my own books. But Ashley and Adib, when you were writing your books, were there any key nuances regarding mental illness that you felt like you were trying to paint into your characters?
I went first last time.
Okay, I'll go first. I feel like this, my first novel actually speaks to this a little bit more. So if that's okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this one. In this novel, all 3 characters are dealing with grief. And so I think grief is sort of a trigger in a lot of ways for people who might not even realize that they have any kind of mental illness. And often it can be a trigger that can make existing mental illnesses worse. And so, or at least like sort of show their ugly heads worse in a worse way. And so the real nuance that I wanted to bring to this story was just that, one, that you could experience grief very differently, even if, losing someone is sort of a universal experience, but there's so many different ways to experience it. And then 2, I wanted to show how difficult it was, sort of like what Eileen was saying, to even know that that's what's happening. So there's a character, a Black character in this book named Shay, and she has anxiety. And when her sister dies, she starts experiencing panic attacks, but she doesn't know for most of the novel what's happening to her. She just thinks that she's like freaking out. Like she calls it, she's like, I had another one of those freakouts. Or like she uses sort of imprecise language. And I think especially in a lot of, I guess, minority communities, there's not a lot of acceptance or conversation about mental illness. And so there's not a lot of language that people have about it. So I've had anxiety for my entire life, but I didn't know that that's what it was until I was an adult and I was diagnosed with it because I went to a therapist. I did not see a therapist for my entire childhood, but I had anxiety. I had panic attacks all the time. And I had no idea that that's what was happening. My mom used to just call me up, like she used to dismiss it and say, oh, she's just a worrier. Or, things like that. But when you're, calling your mom 10 times in a row because you don't know where she is, that's not just a worrier. When you're like leaving weepy voicemail on your, on people's phones because you haven't heard from them in a couple of hours, like that's more than just worrying. And when you're trying to do your homework and you're literally like, you can't breathe, that's a panic attack. But again, I didn't know any of that. And so it was really important for me to put it in a book in a way that people might recognize, even if they don't have the words for it. So making sure that I had that nuance there where, she's having all these symptoms where she's feeling faint or she can't catch her breath or she's crying and she can't stop crying. Those kinds of things that were panic attacks, but I didn't realize it. And then there's a scene where her friends sort of confront her and they're like, yo, this is what's going on. You should talk to somebody. So yeah, that was one thing that was really important to me.
I feel like growing up, there's so many times when I was like called sensitive or nervous. There's all this coded language that people use to skirt around, or even like talking to patients when like we talk about, have you been sad recently? Why don't you just say it out loud? Why don't you just say depressed? Right. And like it took me decades to be able to claim that language, both for myself and for like my family and friends too. Because I talk a lot in my book about labels and how on the one hand, yes, they're bad when you apply them to someone and you define them with that label. But at the same time, it's incredibly, like, I remember when I first was told by a psychiatrist that I was depressed, it was so empowering because it explained so much of what I was feeling, of like all, not only the emotions, but the physical reactions, the fatigue, the appetite changes. And I said this before a couple of weeks ago, like in some ways, the whole idea of mental illness is a misnomer. And you would think that I would know that as a doctor, that it's really physiologic, that it's chemistry. And it took me decades to get to that point. And so, I mean, I feel like we should come up with a better term than mental illness, because saying that someone's mental implies that they're imagining it. In fact, it's like real chemistry. It's a real biological reaction. It's heart palpitation, it's sweating.
There's so many physical symptoms to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to. Adib needs to talk about his book, but really quickly, like when this whole thing first started, the stay-at-home order, I was getting hives and I didn't know why. And so I have a lot of allergies. So I was like, am I eating something weird? Like, is there like a weird new plant or something? And I had a telemedicine call with my allergist, and he was like, it might be anxiety. And I was like, you can get anxiety hives? But apparently you can get anxiety hives. So I just wanted to say that really quick.
No, I used to get like itchy sometimes when I was anxious. And like hot.
Yeah.
It was very strange. But yeah, my experience growing up was, I think, fairly different than both yours in that I was diagnosed at a very early age. I had a family history of mental illness already, and so my mom kind of knew the signs and had me see a psychiatrist very early on, and it's basically been managed fairly well for most of my life, with a few hiccups in high school.
Because high school's awful.
Because high school is awful, and because I was just going through a lot of like life changes. My parents were getting a divorce, and like I was going through some bullying. So like I had kind of an acute phase, but still, even that was managed. They're like, oh, you're doing worse. Let's, adjust your medication and therapy regimen. And so it was really important to me to write a book in which the character is basically managing his illness, and it's not the thrust of the story in any way. It's just kind of a background element of his life, because I feel like for him to say, oh, this is just a normal part of me, and this is one thing I'm dealing with, and this is something that my father is dealing with as well, I think that helps destigmatize it. And I felt that was really important, because right around when I was writing it, I felt like there were like 4 or 5 books that had all come out the year before that all were about how tragically romantic mental illness is, and people were dying by suicide or getting revenge by suicide. And I was like, This is all... Sorry, say again?
No, I just said awesome.
Yeah, I know, right? I was like, this seems A, gross, and B, not at all what my experience was like. And I just wanted to write about, I guess, my own experience because, again, selfish.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like crazy is totally the new normal, you know, especially during COVID, right? I mean, when the New York Times is like soliciting people to like give their anxiety stories, you know, like there's a special coronavirus anxiety hotline. And it's like the first time in my life where I feel like people are asking, how are you doing? Are you okay? And like actually mean it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's one of the few silver linings of all of this, that the stressors have, you know, really unearthed a lot of underlying, I think, you know, low-lying anxieties in people, and also has forced us to start thinking about coping mechanisms. And so in some ways, I actually feel like having, you know, anxiety and depression, like it's actually given me the tools that I need to get through COVID a little bit better. Do either of you guys feel that? Like, have you guys noticed anything or felt like?
I feel like I feel like for me, I'm used to feeling anxious, so that part of it is not new. And I was already seeing a therapist regularly, and I think having that sort of already built into my life. And I was actually seeing my therapist remotely because she used to be in the city and then she moved away and I didn't want to get a new therapist. So I think already having that built into my life has been really nice. And to have some of the, I guess, self-soothing things that I got through therapy, and knowing like to apply them now even more, has definitely been helpful for me during this whole time.
You're a big Instagrammer, right? Like you mentioned like some Instagram sites that you feel like are really helpful at this point.
Oh, yeah. I follow a lot of anxiety, or I guess anti-anxiety Instagram accounts, just that are like, they have like really reassuring and sort of calming, I guess, suggestions for things to do, lists of like ways to feel less sad, or even just like encouraging quotes and stuff like that. So I follow a lot of those, and that's definitely been helpful. But even just like regular self-care type things too, like journaling more and drinking water, like basic sort of things that you should remember. And having those already built into my life, because I know that I'm an anxious person and I do better when I do these things, I think has helped me feel, sort of keep my baseline steady through this.
I've actually been kind of struggling. Like I'm mostly managed, but that's for like a normal. And now that A, nothing is normal, and B, there's no kind of idea of how we're ever going to return to normal, this has really thrown me for a loop. And I have found myself probably being less healthy and making worse decisions in a lot of ways than I normally would. And it's like I haven't quite found my balance again yet.
Yeah.
And that, like, thankfully, I have support networks in place and structures to kind of keep me from like going all the way off the rails. But like, this is certainly bumper bowling right now. And I think a lot about, you know, the way this is bringing more awareness to people's mental health. But I also like worry. I guess we're going to have to wait and see, because I feel like a lot of times when we have these big awareness moments, the language involved quickly gets co-opted. This is going to sound very uncharitable, but co-opted by people without mental illness, and co-opted by all the nice white lady Instagrammers who are going to talk about all their mental health struggles when really they're just a little bit sad. And I think about how like the term triggered, which used to refer very specifically to things that cause you to have post-traumatic flashbacks, has now become synonymous with I don't like this, or it makes me angry.
Yeah.
And I hope we don't see the dilution of this moment in the way that so many other things get diluted. But I guess we have to wait and see.
That's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's really it. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that. But it makes a lot of sense.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be a bummer.
No, Oh no, it makes a lot of sense.
You're not a bummer. That's real. That's like this is real life. That's what this conversation is supposed to be about, you know?
Exactly. And because I think that one of the hardest things about coping with mental illness is that it's so easy for people to say, oh, why don't you just buck up, or why don't you just like think happy thoughts and become happy, you know? And so I don't particularly like the idea of, you know, saying that other people's that so people claim those words. But I do think that things are the good. So I'm thinking of the structural changes that are happening right now that are going to be hopefully really helpful. Number one, that telemedicine is finally getting reimbursable. You know, that insurance companies are somewhat expanding the amount of money that they're allowing for mental health help, and that I definitely think that schools also might be the problem. Though is that it's always a problem of resources, right? Even before all of this, like the whole mental health community was like completely overworked. You know, everybody was struggling, you know, to find a good therapist. You know, a lot of people were just giving up on therapy and just turning straight to medicine. You know, because it's kind of more convenient for some people. So it's certainly one of the challenging things, and I'm sure that there are be questions from the audience, and hopefully maybe even some answers. But you know, I don't want to like make everyone too sad. That wasn't this panel.
Right. Neither do I. And I do think we're seeing some positives, and I think especially these structural things, hopefully they're going to stay. And I actually read an article, I think it was yesterday, someone retweeted an interview Michael Phelps did with ESPN about his involvement with therapy. And like, I was like, oh, like, you know, these famous people are kind of getting in on raising awareness too. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, as with all cultural shifts, it's probably going to be a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but hopefully we're going to keep making positive changes regardless.
Exactly. Welcome back, Ashley. So
now I had to fall out for a second.
Your turn to fall off, okay? So, I'm going to ask you one of my favorite questions. So growing up, books were really my best friends. And one of the reasons I wanted to become a writer was because I wanted to create for other people the type of solace that those books provided me. So do you guys want to tell me some of your favorite reader feedback?
Oh, interesting. I will say my 9-year-old niece read When You Were Everything. And I was actually surprised that she read it. I mean, she's very mature for her age, but I thought she was just like trying to be supportive, you know, because she's really cute and like very, she's sort of like the kind of kid who's always been like hyper vocal, like hyper intellectual, like since she was really young. And so I thought, you know, she was just gonna like take a stab at it, but she read the entire thing. And then she called me and she was just telling me about how she was going through something like this, very similar to this, and she's in the 4th grade. And I was like, Jesus. So I like really loved hearing from her just because it felt like it was more universal than I expected. And it was surprising that it was happening already to her at such a young age. And then with The Beauty That Remains, I've gotten a ton of awesome feedback. But one thing that stands out to me a lot is Shay, the Black girl in When You Were in The Beauty That Remains. She is really into pop punk music. And in addition to being, you know, super anxious and, you know, having all these other sort of aspects of her personality, but there's a lot of music in that book, and she's really into pop punk music. And that was something that I experienced when I was younger, being sort of like the only Black girl at a lot of these concerts that I went to. And so there was one girl who came up to me, sort of like a quiet Black kid who was just like sitting in the back, not really saying anything for most of the time. And she came up to me afterwards and she was just like, nobody likes any of my music either. And then she just started like telling me about, you know, the concerts that she had gone to recently. I had a very similar experience with another Black kid who was really into K-pop. And so it wasn't even the same kind of music, but they had that sort of experience of nobody liking the music that they liked, or none of their friends liking the music that they liked. So those have been sort of a couple of my favorites.
Adib, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, so many of them are a little personal. I do a lot of school visits, and sometimes young people will tell me things that just like really hit me about, like, you know, they've never like gotten to read books about biracial kids before, or they also were part of a diaspora and had never like gotten to read a book about going back and visiting your family before, and those always feel really good. And there's been a few times where kids have come up and said that it like helped them explain like what their mental health was like to other people. Like, this book is what it feels like to be me, and I think that's always really amazing too. I don't know. I feel like I have goldfish memory right now. I have the brain scrambled. I can't think of anything specific. And
you're right. I mean, I like that you're being so sensitive not to disclose other people's, you know, vulnerable spots. But I'm sure that there are a gazillion of them, because I mean, both of your books are so impactful, and I think that one of the most amazing things about writing a book and thinking that it's going to be for a specific type of person, and then sending it out in the world, is seeing how many people you didn't expect would be touched by it, would read it. I have two specific. One of them for my first book, None of the Above, which is about a character that is born intersex and only finds out about it when she's 17, and her best friend leaks her secrets. Was pitched as Middlesex Meets Mean Girls. I remember having a lot of anxiety when I wrote that book, because there's content, my characters have sex in the first chapter. And I think that, I was even told by a salesperson, by my publisher, that the book was a, quote, hard sell, because it was about intersex, because it was about topics that people either weren't familiar with intersex being not transgender, but a biological condition where kids are born neither male nor female, but something in between. But I remember feeling a lot of anxiety about having my family members read it, the more conservative members of my family, specifically my husband's family. So one of my husband's uncles is actually a Catholic priest who, believe it or not, read the book and sent me fan mail and came to my book launch. And so I like to say that None of the Above might have content in it, but it's been blessed by both a priest and a nut. And for This Is My Brain and Love, it's only been out about a month, and I've loved hearing from people who, yes, like Adib, who feel like they've been seen for the first time. People crying at the subway because I use like a Taiwanese word that they never saw in writing before. Also, someone who actually happened to be moved by the fact that one of my characters plays Magic the Gathering, but that's kind of another topic. So
I spent so much money on that game when I was a teenager.
My brothers, oh yeah,
right. It baffles me to this day.
It's canon now. It's part of literary. Yeah. It's part of the literary leitmotif. But I've got a couple of patients I've been really close with that I've seen, over many years, and somehow they found out that I was an author, and like I put them on a mailing list and I sent it out. And I remember one patient who read my first book was blown away when he read this book, and he sent me this long, like 500-word email saying, "Dr. Wong, I didn't realize you were one of us." In other words, he's been struggling with depression and anxiety for like his entire life, and he never thought that I, as his physician, could deal with that. And so, he's this, 60-year-old white dude, but I mean, he related. So that's definitely one of the pieces of your feedback that touched me pretty significantly. But I don't, so Leah, we're 35 minutes in. I don't want to overrun all of our our comments. So I don't know if you want to pop back in again and start to answer some of our questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you guys so much for sharing. That was amazing. I feel like this importance of shared experience, that really seeing yourself in these books as well as Winders and Doors, like especially for me as well, like thank you for sharing. So now I'm excited to share everybody's questions. So you can still add questions down there in the Ask a Question. And we'll take our first one. Our first one, Ashley, if you want to take this first one, it's from Sarah. Sarah asked, does writing anxiety ever make you anxious? Because that happens to me, and I was wondering.
So I find it depends on what I'm writing. If I'm just writing about a situation where someone is sort of experiencing a trigger that is not a trigger for me. So for instance, in a novel that's not out yet, coming out later, I have a character who has anxiety and she is triggered by sirens, specifically because of an accident that her brother was in. And so when I was writing that character, it was easy for me, and it wasn't, sirens are not super triggering for me. And so writing her experience was not difficult. But when I was writing The Beauty That Remains and like writing about being triggered by grief or certain reminders of the person who was no longer there, there were times when I would, start to feel it in my body in a way that was uncomfortable. And so I would either take a break, take a walk. In this novel, there are 3 different characters, so I would just switch to a different character. So
I love that.
Some of the ways that I sort of worked around it, but yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
When I read anxiety, I actually feel empowered about it because obviously you're distancing yourself from it, and like being able to break it down helps me, I guess.
Yeah. I like writing about the solution. So like, I never write a character without them sort of finding some kind of help, because I think that that's really important and really empowering. And so I really love those scenes, writing those scenes, and those feel super cathartic. But the actual moments of like intense anxiety, but I can understand how breaking it down and like thinking about it more, but that might be because you're a doctor.
It might be.
You're thinking about it more clinically, so you can explain it.
What are they feeling in their body? How can I describe it? I definitely disassociate a bit and like have to deal with like the technical aspects of it. So
yeah.
Adib, do you have anything to share as well?
I just must be a little bit sadistic or something, because whenever I have to write a scene about anxiety or depression, I'm like, yes, give me the Reader tears. And that might be like the theater kid in me. It's like, yes, let's ham this up. Let's perform. And so I have a really easy time divorcing myself from what the character is going through and being like, how can I squeeze as much
get all
juice out of this moment?
I mean, all of your books have taken me for a ride, so it's like the empath in me just feels every moment that it's been a fun ride. So thank you guys so much. I think we're gonna go on to the next one. Eileen, this is for you. This is from Carolyn. Carolyn asked, how much were you able to use your medical background to write your book, or did you draw more from your personal experiences as well?
I definitely, obviously, it's very closely related to my personal experience, but it also, if anything, because I'm a urologist, meaning that I work on like kidneys and bladders and unmentionables. So it's not really applicable to mental health per se, except that people often say that I work on the other brain. But And there are some classes of patients that like they say that they don't really need a urologist, they need a psychiatrist, because a lot of things that involve, for instance, chronic pain, like you have to deal with the whole patient. And so if anything, I feel like that is really helpful, because it makes me have to think about other people's stories. I have to sort of puzzle pieces together. I have to piece puzzle pieces together. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but my medicine definitely impacts my writing because of the storytelling aspect of medicine. Like I have to tease out people's stories, and like I actually did a lot of interviews for this, because my second character, Will, who has anxiety, he's actually mixed race Nigerian, and I had to do a lot of interviews with Nigerian friends, Nigerian colleagues, and certain strangers who I happened to get in touch with, talk about how their culture specifically.
Oh, sorry.
Is that Winnie?
Yes, my dog is right here.
So much.
She followed me back in. I ran out to get my charger. That's why I disappeared for a minute.
No worries.
She is perfect. Sharing her with us.
Are we gonna do like a little pet cameo everywhere? I can ask my husband to bring our cat in. I mean,
If we have enough time, maybe we can do a pet blitz.
She's leaving.
I didn't know if there were any other thoughts you wanted to share for that too. Did either of you also draw or just expand on personal experiences that you really put into your books that kind of stand out?
I mean, I definitely did a lot for Shay in The Beauty That Remains. Like I mentioned, the music stuff and the anxiety stuff. And obviously for When You Were Everything, they're just very mean to each other, these girls. So I sort of drew on, I guess some of my less proud moments, and some of the awful things that have been done and said to me when I was writing it. So yeah.
And is there anything you want to share as well?
No, I think they both covered it really well.
Well, so we'll go on to the next one, which is more of a comment for you, Adib, just so you know. Our next one from Sally Donnelly. Sally says, love Darius. You taught me so much in this book, including lots about tea. Thank you so much for creating Darius and teaching me about his culture and his identity. Do you want to share anything else about that, or like being able to?
I'm going to use that as a chance to plug my next book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always be promoting. So thank you very much. I really have kind of loved revisiting, spending time with Darius and then going back and spending more time. And I'm really excited to share the next chapter of his life. In the next book, we find him kind of back from his trip to Iran and more confident, and he's dating a boy named Landon, and he's interning at the tea shop he wanted, and he's on the soccer team, and he has his depression's fairly well managed, and he has all these things that he said he wanted, but he still isn't quite happy, and has to kind of figure out why that's the case. And one of the big elements of it is also that while Darius's depression is pretty well managed right now, his dad is actually kind of dealing with a depressive episode, and Darius is learning to kind of be empathetic and be a caretaker in his own right. And I'm really excited to share that for people, because I think we're seeing a lot of books about people living with depression, but we don't always get to see what it's like when you're living with someone who's dealing with mental illness, and the ways that can be fraught, and the ways that you can do your best to care for them. And so I'm really excited to share that. So that was a really rambly way of trying to tell people.
No, perfect.
And I'm really sad that you talked about him being on the soccer team and not saying soccer/American football.
Now that he's back,
Sorry.
In the United States, he's mostly calling it soccer.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I what you're saying about not, I think that all our books are obviously for people who have mental illness, but they're especially for people who have loved ones who have mental illness. Like I said, I kind of wrote this for my kids in the future, and I hope that it also allows them to understand me a bit better. Yeah, I mean, there's so much about how your mental illness informs your relationships with everybody, and I've been on both sides of the equation. You know, I've like been the person who's depressed and like can't stand like the other person just trying to tell me to just think happy thoughts. But I've been also the person like trying to like get a loved person into therapy or be like, why don't you just try this or try that? And it can be really, really hard when people are resistant to seeking help, either because they feel like they can, quote, handle it themselves, or because of a sense of machismo. And I've certainly been, again, on both sides of that equation, feeling like I can handle this myself, I can figure it out. You don't need to give me that label, at the same time trying to do the other way.
Yeah. I think that's a kind of good segue to our next one. I think we can have enough time to take a couple more. So our next one's from Maria. This is for you, Adib, but I feel like all of your books can kind of touch upon this as well. But Maria asks, Adib, you place Darius in a culture that doesn't seem to be terribly understanding of depression as a real mental condition. Can you talk about the impact of culture on mental health and its treatment?
Yeah, kind of building off what Eileen was saying, one of the hardest things about mental illness is access to treatment. And sometimes you think you don't need it. Sometimes you think you can't get it. And it's so easy to tell people, let me know if you need me, or let me know if I can help in any way. But one of the insidious things about mental illness is that sometimes it robs you of the ability to say, I need help. And sometimes you really do need someone to just swoop in and do something for you. And especially when you're a minor, your parents can swoop in and be like, we're taking you to the doctor. And so if you're in a culture that stigmatizes mental illness, that doesn't believe it's serious, that sees it as a character flaw instead of, a matter of chemistry, that can close the door on a lot of options that young people need. And that can close the door on options you need as an adult too. When you're an adult, there's usually no higher authority that can have power of attorney and be like, we're taking you to the doctor. But there are still hopefully people in your life that can be like, you need help and you're not asking for it, so I'm going to come and do this thing for you, and we're gonna solve it together. And so, yeah, I think as we shift more cultures, we'll hopefully see better outcomes across the board.
Ashley or Eileen, do you want to share, coming from like other cultures or communities that you find maybe kind of overcoming that stigma? You kind of came to that in your books as well?
I think the hardest thing, I figured, sorry. I think that the hardest thing growing up when there's just so much stigma is that you feel like you don't have any role models within your culture. Like there's no one showing you the path forward. And so I think that the more books there are out there, the more, celebrities there are out there, like Michael Phelps, like Adib, like you're talking about, coming out and actually discussing their history. That can overcome a lot of the stigma within specific cultures. And so, I mean, definitely the media and art plays such a role, not only in like creating mirrors, but also helping, like taking your parents to see that type of movie, and starting conversations and discussions, even just talking about it obliquely, even not necessarily talking about yourself, but talking about a piece of art can really help stimulate it. Sometimes it can be scary, like if a parent or sibling, sees a movie that very closely mirrors what you're feeling and speaks about it in a derogatory way. But it's possible that you're asking them, so why did you feel that way? And like helping reveal their own biases can be helpful, but it's tough. I mean, I, for so long, didn't want to, quote, come out with the depression because of the fear of being perceived as weak, especially, as a doctor, as a surgeon. I mean, surgeons are like, notoriously God complexed and, they feel like they're invincible. And, whenever I cried in front of a patient, I was always told that I was weak, and I remember there was a point where I couldn't, I didn't have a therapist for a while, and so I was prescribing myself my own antidepressants. And I remember being afraid that my nurses would see a refill and be like, "Oh, there's something wrong with Dr. Wong." And hopefully, the more that I talk about it, the more that I know that this becomes normalized, the more other people will come to see the light.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else want to add? So I'm just going to take a few more, just one more. So just a quick question for Ashley. Carolyn also asked, Ashley, can you share those Instagram accounts that you mentioned before for calming?
Yeah. Oh, crap. I don't have my, oh, wait, I had sent them all to Eileen. So I actually do have them in my email. I was like, I don't have my phone with me. Let me see if I can find it really quick. I know one of, oh, you said we can post them after?
Well, we can always see if we want to through social media, but if you have any to share for our discussion right now.
I know that there's one off the top of my head called Anxiety Assist. It's like anxiety.assist is the handle.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is really great because not only do they post sort of things about anxiety and sort of how to deal with it, but they also open up their DMs. And so you can message them and they will post people's messages anonymously and say like, hey, like, does anybody have advice for like this person who's going through this thing? So I really like that one a lot. I will, if you guys follow me on Twitter, or even if you just like look me up on Twitter, I'll post the other ones that look at that. I'll post the other ones there too. Black Female Therapists, The Open Space, Your Gray Matter, talking about your head. But yeah, I'll post some of the other ones there as soon as we're done here. And I'll post them on my Instagram too. And I'm Ash Wrights, at Ash Wrights on both of those platforms.
Thank you so much. I feel like these kind of resources are really helpful. There's so much social media out there. And I've seen a lot of great resources on your website as well. So thank you for putting that out there. And by just sharing, thank you all so much.
Can I also quickly plug?
Yeah. Oh, of course.
There's also an account called Not Okay app, just the letters OK. And it's two teenagers actually that made an app to help connect young people to mental health resources. And they're doing incredible work. And it's really awesome, especially that it's like focused on young people and it's less, I don't know, like controlling adults. I think it's really excellent and exceptional. And I wish I had that kind of drive when I was young. I was busy playing Magic the Gathering.
We all have our ways to cope. Thank you. Yeah, these kind of resources are so important. So thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for being resources yourself as we segue into wrapping up. I just want to say thank you so much, Eileen, Adib, Ashley, for sharing. I always like to end with one question. So before we wrap up, what are you all reading right now? What's getting you through or engaging you at the moment?
I just finished Case and Calendar's new one. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it.
Felix Ever After.
Yeah. I kept thinking Felix the Great. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. Felix Ever After. That book is gorgeous. I feel like I learned so much about the trans community and what it's like to be transgender. Even though I feel like I considered myself like pretty well educated before, but even just like how many different identities there are, all that kind of stuff, on top of it just being an adorable, like great story about like the dangers of catfishing and being willing to open yourself up to love. So I really, really enjoyed that one. Felix Ever After.
I've been reading Love from A to Z by S.K.L.E., which is a wonderful Ramadan read, so you guys should talk about it. I think that one of the things that's been so impressive about that is that, she wrote it as a fluffy rom-com, but yet it has so much weight because it talks about Islamophobia, it talks about physical illnesses, and it also is one of the best stories I've ever read with an angry girl who gets the boy. There are so many manic pixie dream girls, there are all types of girls, but like the main female character, like she's very clearly got anger issues, but yet she's such a full and beautifully realized person. I just loved being able to see someone with that much spirit and someone who wouldn't be the traditional heroine get the guy.
Awesome. Thank you. Adib?
I have been rereading the Murderbot Diaries, the most recent of which, the full-length novel Network Effect, came out last week or 2 weeks ago. But it's basically about a depressed cyborg in a over-commercialized dystopic future that gave itself free will, works protecting humans from the foolish things that humans do because it doesn't really know what else to do with itself, but it would really rather be watching soap operas. And it's absolutely charming and delightful, and it's Murderbot is also very depressed and anxious, and it's very relatable.
Thank you all so much. Those are such great recommendations. So that's all time we have for questions. Thank you everyone so much for your great contributions. I wish I could have gotten to all your questions, so thank you so much. And thanks so much, Eileen, Adib, Ashley, for joining us and sharing. It's so important what your books and what you've shared with us. And of course, thank you all viewers so much today for joining us. Of course, don't forget you can still click that shining green buy button on the bottom to get your own copy of Eileen's newest book, This Is My Brain in Love, Ashley's newest book, When You Are Everything, and Adib's book, Darius the Great Is Not Okay. And of course, shop our online store for all their other amazing books.
And yeah, please help save our indie. Support these amazing bookstores that create such incredible conversations, that give us the space to shoot the shit and honestly talk a little bit therapy ourselves. But this is a tough time, but events like this are going to live on forever on Politics and Prose YouTube page and be able to be a beacon for so many people. And I really want them to stay in business. So just buy. You don't even really need to buy my book, but just buy something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for hosting us. This was tremendous.
Is there anything else you all wanted to share?
If we have time, what are you guys working on?
Just a moment. We have one more minute.
All right. So I'm starting work again on my completely new genre, a YA historical fantasy medical thriller that I'm determined to write, that might now have certain aspects that are new to the plot based on current conditions. But,
Right.
Very excited.
how about you? This unpublished book, Ash, that you were talking about.
Teasing.
Oh, I'm writing a series of they're called like high-low reads, but they're basically very short novels for reluctant readers.
Oh, yeah.
So that series is called Fly Girls, and it's going to be 4 books. They're super short, so real fast, and it's about 4 friends who go to an arts school in Harlem.
Cool.
Awesome. Nadine, do you want to mention your next book?
Yeah. So Darius the Great Deserves Better comes out August 25th. And then my picture book, 7 Special Somethings, A Noru Story, comes out on February 16th, 2021.
Oh, exciting.
Awesome. I'm excited for all of your books. Again, thank you all so much and for giving those teasers for your upcoming stuff. I hope everyone enjoyed the event, and I hope to see everyone again at our next event. You can click on that button at the top where it says Politics and Prose if you want to follow us for upcoming ones, as well as our social media. You can follow us at Kids and Prose. And also check out our website for upcoming listings. I hope I can see you all again soon. One thing that I found when reading all of our guest books is the importance of talking and shared experiences. So I'm so thankful to be able to be a part of this chat and show that while we all might feel isolated, we can find these outlets through reading and writing and discussion. So thank you so much again for sharing. Keep reading and expanding your world. Bye. Thank you everyone so much.